So you want your mixes to sound louder, fuller, more exciting, without crushing your dynamics? Meet our flagship plugin, the Oxford Inflator. As Sonnox's content creator, I've had direct access to the masterminds that built this tool. Today, I'll show you exactly how the engineers behind this industry standard plugin intended it to be used. Welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, I'm Tom. I've been an artist and producer for over 10 years, and I create videos for Sonnox to help artists, producers, and engineers craft professional sounding records in your own space. Sonnox plugins are trusted by top mixers and producers worldwide, and the Inflator has been a go-to secret weapon for decades. So let's get straight into it and jump into our session. All right, so a little while back, my favorite artist, Aries, released the stems for his track Cabin Fever, and he did this for a song flip contest. So let's have a listen to what we've got.
In the house for a very long time. Never I cease, I get better like wine. Got it all, don't act malicious. The only thing that I lack, forgiveness. I wish Cam was still with us, but he's up. In the house for a very long time. Never I cease, I get better like wine. Soul searching, found me online.
So there's a couple of things that I'm immediately noticing, and the first one I think is the most important, is that these drums sound really big in isolation, but when they come in with the full arrangement, they just slightly lose their presence a little bit.
Soul searching, found me online. And I'm out reach, got a hand on the sky. Stop being so emotional, you smoking on.
They're peaking at about -8, and that's a trick that I learned from Disclosure, that this just sort of gives you enough headroom to kind of mix into the final limiter on the mix bus. So I don't really want to push it any harder than that. I want to make sure that that peak stays at the same level, but it just cuts through the mix a little bit more. So I'm going to reach for the Oxford Inflator. I'm going to stick it just before my limiter. And right out the gate, let's just have a listen to what it's doing when I just turn the effect up.
Soul searching, found me online. And I'm out reach, got a hand on the sky. Stop being so emotional, you smoking on.
So just immediately you can already hear how much more detail that's bringing into the drums. Let's talk really quickly about what the Oxford Inflator does. There's a lot that goes on underneath the hood, but the key thing to take away is that it increases perceived loudness. And this is different from a compressor because compressors can introduce this pumping effect when it's cranked. And the Inflator also introduces this warmth, this character, this has this sort of analog valve-like feel that some compressors can achieve. But again, when you're cranking those things, they can really start to squash the dynamics. So let's take a look at the controls of the Inflator. So on the left-hand side, you've got the input section. We can either decide how much input level we're giving it through the fader here, which is much more of like a manual feeling-based way of doing it, or we can do it via the input value section here. And this allows us to type an exact numeric value. So for instance, if I want an extra 6 dB of level, I can just type in 6 there and immediately we have that. And then the meter will display the input level relative to digital maximum. So you can see that 0 dB, which is digital maximum here, but it actually goes up to +6 dB. You can use this to determine how much headroom you have, or you can crank the input and you can distort the program material. Just very quickly, let's talk about the effects in the curve section. So think of the effect fader as your blend knob. This is essentially allowing you to decide how much of that inflator effect you're hearing, and you can mix it in from between 0 to 100%. With the curve section, this changes the character of the inflator. If we bring it down to -50, this is going to be a lot more subtle. It's going to add richness, it's going to add depth, but it's not going to be overwhelming. The Inflator defaults to 0 on the curve, and this is a much more balanced, warm, valve-like tone. This is a great default for many users and many scenarios. And then as we crank towards +50, this is a big, this is fat, this is a very mid-forward sound. It's bringing out all of the background detail, but at the same time, inevitably, this is going to reduce more subtle dynamic changes in the source signal. Let's talk about the buttons quickly. So you've got clip 0 dB, and this essentially just keeps the levels capped at digital maximum. If you turn it off, you're going to start to see your input level go beyond 0 dB. This can just allow for a little bit more punch. But if you keep clip 0 dB on, this essentially behaves as a hard clipper, and it doesn't allow any of the source material to go above digital maximum. The next button we have is band split. This splits the audio into 3 frequency bands before it hits the Inflator. When you turn it off, this is a much more full range direct mode. mode. This can be helpful in certain situations, but I'd experiment playing around with it when you're dialing in your inflator effect. And finally, you have this effect in button. This is a 0 latency bypass switch, but what it doesn't do is it doesn't reset the output fader to 0. If you've been level matching or gain staging, you're going to hear the inflator effect in and out, but at -6 dBs reduction in output, for instance. So a handy way that I like to get around that is I like to use this preset hot swap button. This is normally used to A/B between different settings, but I like to use it as a bypass because it resets the output to 0 at the initialized settings. Lastly, we have the output section. You can use the fader to adjust the final level leaving the inflator. So as I mentioned, if you're gain staging or perhaps level matching, we don't want to be introducing loudness and thinking that that's the inflator effect. We want to be increasing perceived loudness without actually turning up the volume. All right, so that's the controls of the inflator, but I think it's time to hear it in action. So what I would do as a good starting point for the inflator is I'm going to turn the effect all the way up to 100%, and then I'm going to ride the input fader until I start to see the clip lights turn red.
So searching, found me online, no, and I'm out reach, got a hand on the sky. Stop being so emotional, what you smoking on? Last time I opened up, you can't roll with us.
That already sounds really good. So let's have a listen to them in isolation and see if we're adding any unwanted distortion. Bear in mind that sometimes distortion can be pleasing, so don't just immediately hear it and think, I have to turn this down. Really use your ears and listen. Do you like it or do you not? And if you do, keep it in, maybe even crank it a bit further. Let's see what we're going to do. That kick to me is just sounding a little bit crunchy in isolation, so I'm going to experiment with turning it down just a touch. Another thing I can do is I can turn off clip 0 dB, and maybe when we do that, we're going to start to see the claps going above 0 dB, and maybe we like that. So when I turn clip 0 dB off, it's actually making the kick sound a lot more natural, and it's really crunching up those claps and those snares. So I actually prefer it off in this instance. I could try turning up the band split. Let's try turning up the curve, see what that does. So I'm going to keep my curve high. I want these to be very like mid forward. I want them to feel slammed in your face. I'm happy to sacrifice some of that dynamic range in the drums, but something that I really need to be careful for here is making sure that I'm not just hearing extra volume. So I'm going to go back to the default settings with the effect turned off. And I'm going to take the effect out just to be sure. I'm going to pay attention to my meter here. So we've got -8.5 on the meter. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to click the meter again. Let's turn it on. And now we've got straight back to -8.5. Bear in mind that I've got a limiter in front of it, so it's never going to get any higher than that. But this just makes sure it's not slamming into that limiter. So this is it A beat. This is it with it off. So it sounds so much louder, but actually we haven't increased the volume at all. And this is the magic of the Inflator plugin. It manages to increase this perceived loudness without actually turning up the volume. So let's have a listen to the instrument bus now and see if there's anything that we can do there. So I actually really like how the bass is sitting right now. So I don't want to increase the bass's volume too much, but those guitars on the sides, although they're crunchy, I definitely think they could get a lift. So let's see if we can use the curve section of the Inflator to increase the presence of the guitars without actually overwhelming the kick by introducing too much bass. So I'm going to grab an Inflator and put it on my instrument bus. Let's turn the effect all the way up. And let's just pay attention really quickly to the meter of the instrument bus. So we're peaking around -4, and this time we don't actually have the safety of a limiter. I could put one on, but I want to make sure that I'm demonstrating to you that this is the inflator doing the heavy lifting, not just the limiter. So let's have a go here. Let's turn the effect all the way up. Let's start riding that input fader until we get to 0. So watch as I increase the curve of the inflator here, and you're going to start to really hear those guitars break up and start to distort, potentially in a way that isn't pleasing. So we need to be careful of that, and we may even need to bring the curve back. Let's have a listen. Getting really crunchy now. And also the bass is coming in so much now. If we turn on the drums, kick's just losing a little bit of its oomph. We want to make sure that that kick is still loud and clear, it's thumpy. So let's just pull the curve back a little bit. Straight away, we've got a little bit less crunch in the guitars, so we're still maintaining some of that tonality. So let's just actually turn the inflator off on our B preset. Let's have a look at those meters one last time. So we're peaking at -4.8. So let's go over to our output section. We can click the value section, type in 4.8. It knows I mean -4.8, so I don't need to type in that minus. And let's have a listen now. Notice how that meter isn't going past -4.8. To me, it sounds a lot louder. Let's double check. That to me just sounds so much more upfront. It sounds so much better. And we've not actually got any louder. Now these vocals already have a fair amount of compression on them. So you might be thinking there's probably no way to squeeze out any more loudness out of these. But actually, as I mentioned before, the inflator isn't a compressor. So it actually says in the manual that it can increase the perceived volume of full level white noise. So it's not only increasing the loudness of source material by just adding in more harmonics, there's a lot more sort of psychoacoustic stuff going on under the hood. So even though these vocals are very compressed, I'm convinced that we can get them even louder. Right, okay, you know the drill. Effect at 100%. Let's crank the input fader. In this case, I'm going to keep clip 0 dB on because I want everything to be affected and I want to drive everything up into that ceiling. Let's pay attention to those meters real quick. Peaking at -6.3 so far. So let's change our output to -6.3. Mess around with the curve. So let's have a listen to how that sounded before and how it's going right now. Perfect. Right, let's have a listen to what we've got so far. It actually got so loud, I had to turn the vocals down. And you don't have to do this. I could actually back off the input fader, but it's just gonna give me even more headroom to be able to go even harder into the mix bus inflator and ultimately the Oxford limiter. So let's finally go into the mix bus and see what we can do. All right, so we've applied the mix bus on the drums, on the instruments, and on the vocals, and finally on the mix bus. So let's now listen to how much louder we've made our track. And I'm gonna level match these such that you're not hearing any volume increase, you're only hearing the effect of the Oxford Inflator. So we've got our 4 inflators, and I'm gonna be A-Bing between these as we go. Let's have a listen. So it really is this incredible little plugin. I was at minus 2.5 dB before I turned on the inflators, and we were peaking at minus 2.5 again after we were turned on all the inflators. And this is before we've even hit our limiter stage. So there's even more volume to be eked out of this mix. This isn't something that I'm suggesting that you should do for every genre of song. I don't think this would be a good idea for classical music, for instance, but the inflator manual says it itself. It says that the inflator is designed to address the preference in pop music today of maximum perceived loudness. And the inflator is a product of the loudness wars that were occurring in the 90s. And still to this day, it's being used by producers and artists and engineers all over the world to eke out the maximum amount of volume in their tracks. So that's our tour of the Oxford Inflator, one of our flagship plugins and a staple in professional mixes around the world. If you want to dig deeper, check out this video where I combine Inflator with the Oxford Limiter to maximize loudness on a real track. Or if you're working on vocals, we've got a 2-plugin workflow that shows you how to achieve a polished professional vocal mix. You'll find both right here. And if you want to check out the Inflator by yourself, there's a 15-day free trial that you can get using the link in the description. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.